And we have some familiar names, so glad to see you there. I thought I wasn't going to be able to see names, but I can definitely see them, so awesome. So maybe as best practice, what we can do is put our name / our company name, and that will help us know better who you are, who we're talking to, and better keep the conversation relevant. I'll give people one more minute and we can get started. And hopefully those will be similar to our monthly meetings, an informal session where you can ask questions. At this end, we'll leave them until the end, but definitely make sure to ask and reach out to make this more relevant to you. And for those newcomers, we're giving people a couple minutes to join, and then we'll get started. I'm glad to see a couple of our monthly Hotel Analytics Working Group attendees. Thank you for your support and attending this. I'll give people a few more seconds. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining today. And hopefully you'll find this session interesting. So all decisions need to be based on really data and what data tells us, right? Long gone are the days where we would decide on hunches and opinions. Now, 2020 was a clear example of that. Nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew how the market would behave. And the successful ones were the ones to really understand what their data was telling us, and then action based on that data. So understanding that current landscape and adapting was key at the time. And from an analytics point of view, how do we make sure and understand what the business needs are at the right time, and what solutions are we providing? This is what we'll tackle today. I'm Connie Marinacci, co-chair of the Hotel Analytics Working Group, and today I'm joined by Anisha Yadav, my partner in crime within the Hotel Analytics Working Group. Together, we have invited key of our blog contributors that we've had through the year on the different topics of analytics, customer journey, and so forth. And we'll tackle different topics. Similar to our monthly meetings for the working group, we'd like to keep this informal, so you'll see some back and forth of the topics between the speakers, and hopefully you'll ask questions in the chat that we can tackle at the end. Anisha will be moderating the chat, so you'll see her post a few links and answers if she knows, or take note of the questions until the end. So let me introduce our guests for today, and I'll ask them to unmute themselves. So we have Eduardo Del Negro, co-founder at BlinkUp, Andrew Cork, Business Intelligence Director at Travelport.
Hi.
And Salman Akbar, Director of BI and Analytics for Accor North America.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for joining today. You have been great contributors in the past year or so of the working group blogs, and that's great to see. And thanks to you guys, we have that content posted on the Henna blog. And today we feel we talk about a couple of those topics. So why don't we start with a market mix? You know, when I hear about market mix, it means something different to e-commerce than distribution and finance. So what is exactly market mix in your view? And maybe we can start with Salman.
Yeah, thanks, Connie. Thank you, Hadna, for having me on board today. Yeah, as you said, market mix is, no one thing, even within a company, let alone across companies within the industry. And I think it really depends on what different actions you would take to those different markets. So an e-commerce kind of application, it might be different to segment based on how often people come to your website versus not. Whereas for a revenue management kind of function, it may be applicable to kind of view your customers as a group or kind of like leisure travel based on how quickly they book or how far in advance, what their price sensitivities are, and so on. But the interesting thing is that is the definitions are changing all the time, especially these days now with work from home becoming actually work from anywhere. Is a thing now. So we'll definitely see a lot more leisure trips, so blended, business travel and leisure. So how do you define those people? So it's definitely very interesting, uh, thing to talk about market mix, meaning different things.
Yeah, and I think I'd follow on from that really with that common separation we talk about between business and leisure travel, and I think it's something that's changing. And certainly, the last year and a half, we've seen things that are very, very different, and a lot of the kind of common segmentation. And I guess the first thing I'd raise is that the relevant split anymore? Is that how we need to distinguish? Because what we're really trying to do is understand the type of traveler that is coming, and we're seeing increasingly the mix of business and leisure, that horrible portmanteau bleisure that keeps getting around the world. But we're seeing all those things. How do we define it? And I think we've seen a lot of people do the sort of rules-based classification. I've worked with a lot of customers and say, okay, well, let's look at the corporate travel, and we're going to define that as anything that's arriving on certain days or booking a certain lead time. And then ask the question, well, have we seen lead time change between, well, if you're using that to define, then no, of course it hasn't, because that's how you're defining your business traveler, by the type of actions that they're taking. So I think we've had to have a bit of a reset really. And I think it's something that, as an industry, we're really trying to kind of work through is, what are the relevant classifications now? Is it business leisure? Is it from people coming from different markets? And even within that business leisure, we talk about different categories in different countries. Business travel, we quite often look through, and I think we're all guilty of potentially looking through a North American or European or an Asia lens, depending on where we are in the world. But business travel in the Middle East is very different to business travel in South America to Asia. And I think it's understanding what we mean and really why we want to know that, I think is, that's really where we want to try and maybe answer those questions.
And Andrew, even if imagine you did rule-based, how do you keep track of that rule-based as it evolves? Then you would have rule-based one, but then it changes every 6 months or so. Like you would have to review it, right?
Absolutely. It's you're constantly chasing your tail on those ones. So I think it's when we can look at things, and it's something that we've been working quite hard on, is trying to understand that mix and say, okay, well, if I can look at these guys and say this group of travelers are business, and I know this group of travelers are leisure, what are the common attributes? What are the things I can do, and what can I model out from that can help me predict other travelers where I don't necessarily know the source of it?
It's definitely worth noting. Anytime there's a rules-based kind of system, is to keep an eye on what those rules are, and to validate, right? So if you've got a system that defines this as group of business travelers, and that one is leisure, I think it's important to validate those. So just take a sample and ask, or have the hotels kind of validate. Yep, these 9 out of 10 of people that you identified as business travelers are actually business travelers. And also to look at what rules, like Andrew mentioned, lead time, right? I mean, we all know in the past year, lead time went completely upside down in terms of what our typical kind of booking patterns were. Everything booked within the last week, really, for hotels. So,
and in fact, now that we're talking about rule-based and reviewing those rules, then imagine you want to compare market mix year on year. Now, if you change the rules halfway through, then you got to go back and be like, okay, so my rule was that last year and then this year, and then how do you compare that? That's no longer apples to apples.
Also, because depending on from my opinion, also on the changing on the market. So it's really important to understand also the external factor locally that can impact on the decision, that impact on the marketing mix. So also keep an eye on the local market, like for example here in Italy, for example, the Como Lake impact the actors that bought the house here impact on the destination. So also the external factor locally can impact also the marketing mix.
Definitely. And based on that, is based on how quickly the market changes, is the flexibility and how quick, right, we need to react. Imagine, I mean, the pandemic was a clear example. Overnight.
is important also absolutely to keep an eye every day constantly, because the market change could change very, very fast and we have to react immediately. Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, but, we're understanding and seeing these segments and so forth. And from the performance standpoint or the data standpoint, then the key is to really make data available as effective as possible, right? I'm imagining effective dashboards out there, and then the unlimited dashboards that are created sometimes to help our teams interpret the data and have data available as often as they need, or based on their needs, or however they want to react. So why don't we start with you, Andrew, about effective dashboards? What does that look like?
Thanks, Connie. I think it's a very long answer, and I'll try and keep it to some of the highlights, because we could easily do a few days probably on that one. But I think there are some big changes really over the last 5, 10, 15 years. We talk about dashboards, and what I hear from a lot of people is, oh no, it's another dashboard. And so I'll sit down and go, well, what are you looking at? And they go, well, I've got this dashboard from finance, I've got this one from sales, I've got this one from account. I've got 15 dashboards that I need to kind of try and bring together. And if we think back, for those of us that have been working in this longer than others, I guess, a few grey hairs showing how long I've been doing this for, dashboards started as the exact opposite, right? It was, we've got all these reports, we've got data, we're wading through it. But as we've seen data proliferate, we've almost got to the stage where we've got more data than we know what to do with. Previously, we had fairly finite data sources and we didn't know, but we're looking at click streams, we're looking at search behavior, we're looking at all of this new, particularly sort of telemetry and other sorts of data coming through from new channels that just overload. And it ends up with adding more and more and more and more, and people just get paralyzed. So for me, I think we need to come back to that idea of what dashboards are intended to do, which is quite simply make it easier, right? So there's always going to be that piece of how can we shorten the time it takes? And I appreciate there's a very long answer to get to the point around shortening time it takes to get somewhere. But it really is. It's, for our business users and our stakeholders and our customers, how can they get the information they need to make a decision and take action as fast as possible? And sometimes that's just a number. Sometimes it's an individual KPI. Sometimes it's a dashboard. So it's understanding that and how you can get the most out of data and analytics, rather than just the sort of stock answer of, I think some people out in the analytics world, they go, okay, if I just throw data at the business, they're going to perform better. And the stark reality is that they're just not. They're either not going to read it, or they're not going to take the time to understand it. So I think, yeah, it gets into how far do we go, because
definitely.
Yeah, it gets into that kind of personalization. Oh, sorry, Sam.
No, I was just going to touch off on that, Andrea. I think you hit the nail right on the head in terms of moving from a period of time where people didn't know where to get the data from and spent a lot of time pulling the numbers and pulling data from various different sources and different reports together, to a position where now there's almost an overload. But if you go back to your goal of like the goal of dashboards and reporting is to save time, then you're not really saving time if now people have to wade through lots of different reports. So I think it is time. Time is the one resource that everybody's short on, right? So just think about how to make things concise as possible and just relay the information quickly.
Yeah, and that's really about knowing your audience as well. So it's working with the stakeholders, with the people that are actually going to be doing this, whether that's C-suite, whether it's a salesperson. Everyone's going to have different needs, and how far you go down that personalization route. I think that's where a lot of the art comes into BI and analytics, because you could very easily go down and try and create a perfect dashboard for every individual, but then you're maintaining 3,000 different dashboards. Similarly, if you have one to try and operate the entire company, yeah, you're probably in trouble as well, because it's not going to work. So it's finding that right balance.
And Andrew, I remember in you have a part 1 and a part 2 blog, and one of the parts of the blogs, you talked a lot about the fact that what's the business need? I mean, because oftentimes you get told, oh yeah, do this pie chart, but in reality, us, coming from the dashboard world and the analytics world, we need to ask, what the actual need is, what do you want to answer, and then figure out, what the dashboard will look like, type thing, right?
Yeah, it's that whole why. And actually, it's not about someone coming to you and saying, I need this bit of data. It's someone coming to you and say, I have a business problem. And I think that as an analytics community, we need to stand up and have the confidence to be able to ask those kind of questions, but also recognize it is a two-way process. So the business needs to be prepared that, this guy that's stuck in the basement that's feeding them numbers for the last 5 years is suddenly going to be asking them questions about what is it they're actually trying to do, what's their business strategy, what's their sales strategy, all those kind of things coming through. But I think it empowers both us and the business if we can actually do that a lot more than we're probably doing.
And I think it's critical to really, to that point, involve your end users in every step of the way. So right from the beginning, the inception of like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What are your pain points in your day-to-day job? Like, what would you do better if you only had this piece of information, right? And it's realized that it's an iterative process. So as you get those questions answered, you'll realize as you put up a dashboard or have a mock-up or whatnot, that's going to trigger more thoughts and different ways that your end users are then going to look at things, and then things could change. So very often when we start dashboarding, the end result looks very different than what the first kind of version of what we thought it was.
And is it that they become also kind of owners of this dashboard? Because the analytics person will set it up and put it together, but the real owner of the real owner of actioning is the one that's making plans around it, right?
Absolutely. I think 100%. It's everybody. You'll realize, or I've realized that everybody does have a way of getting to their answers, and more often than not, it's a very long-winded way or inefficient or whatnot. If all you're doing is providing them what you think is a faster way, it's not necessarily always going to get adopted, right? So in a lot of cases, people will still stick to their old habits and their old ways of doing things. And, whether it's something as simple as, my GM prefers this view versus that view, et cetera. But if they're involved in the process and they, have a say in what it's going to look like and why and all of that, you definitely have a much higher chance of adoption at the end.
Definitely. And that's one of the main points that we talked about in the blog that we published, how to involve the key stakeholders through the entire process from the beginning to the end. Definitely important. For sure. And how about data source, maybe Salman? What do we think about the data sources themselves? Where is the data coming from? Do we trust it? And so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that's very obviously critical, in terms of the credibility of the data that you're trying to, or the reporting that you're trying to show. It's often, where things kind of get derailed if somebody says, hey, hang on a minute, that number doesn't look right. Or, it just kind of brings into, the question of trust. Can I trust everything else that's on this report? Right. So obviously very critical to make sure that, that chain of kind of custody of where the data originates and how it ends up on the final dashboard, it still means what it means. I would say, I guess, and it's important not to get too far the other way as well. Yes, if you're looking at different numbers from different sources, they are not going to match 100%. It's important to realize and to educate that, yes, there might be like a, let's say for whatever application for trending purposes, a 1% or 5% variation isn't going to change the story. And at the end of the day, what you're trying to figure out is what is the story behind this data and the numbers. So.
Great point, actually. Essentially, you look at the trend, it don't match like, the $100,000, just look at the trend as it go in the same direction.
And, it really depends on what the application is. A finance report, going to the owners, the P&Ls, better be accurate to the cent. But if you're using, some reporting for trending of your marketing mix of your customer kind of, patterns and whatnot, it's less important.
It's also important to, from my opinion, also to understand exactly the source. Like, for example, Google Hotel Insight is really important to understand the logic behind. If, for example, we use this data in a dashboard and understanding the trend, in this case, it's where the data is stored and how to use the trend that is coming from, for example, the Google Hotel Insight, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Totally.
I think a lot of that comes into how having that relationship with your end users, with your audience, and taking the time to go through that education process. And education isn't about, okay, this is how you log in, this is how you clear the filters, this is how you select a filter, this is, okay, it's actually understanding what the data is, and some to your point there, where it's, where there are variables in there, where there are things that we know are not going to be 100% accurate. It's about not hiding that and saying, okay, look, this is, the numbers we know. There is going to be some fluctuation there because of the way the data is captured or whatever else it is. Explain it, own it, and be honest with people about it. Because if we do that and we have that kind of relationship, we don't risk that credibility loss that I think you talked about earlier as well, which is that it's one of the worst things as an analyst to put out. And you put out data and someone knows it's wrong, and it might be one number on one report to one person, but suddenly everything that you've done, everything that your team's done can start to be questioned by the whole organization. So I think where we do have those things where we're not 100%, and I completely agree, as analysts, we tend to push down to everything has to be 100%, and we shouldn't. But where we don't, we need to be really honest and transparent with our users about why it is and why these things are going to be different.
Definitely. I mean, I get hotels all the time coming back to me with their interpretation of what Google Analytics is telling them, right? And oftentimes, it's not the 100% of the story. They're missing this entire other website that they also get traffic from, or last year the website was different, and basic things that, education is important because, people might not be in the data like we are all the time. So, do they remember that the website changed halfway through the year? Do they remember that there was a tracking issue and all that? So I think definitely education is an important topic for sure.
Yeah, also starting about the mission, because when we talk with the GM and we have in front of us 80 or 90 hotel in the Southern Europe, we have to be sure that the mission that the dashboard will is exactly about the expectation about the GM, for example. So how could the dashboard support your business and simplify the business life is a crucial point, a starting point, from my opinion. Also, in terms of the education and how to use this data, because otherwise we lose time, and we know very well that it's usual that we lose time to explain. And so from my opinion, the education is a key element to take in consideration.
Definitely. In fact, you mentioned GMs, Eduardo. GMs are, in all the topics all the time. How can they, look at different views of the data changes or the tracking changes? They're not going to be on top of that. So, repetition, and making sure they understand what they're looking at will be key in that sense.
Yeah, I think that leads into that audience piece, and particularly where you're dealing with sort of senior exec, SLT, other kind of leaders through the business, or through your customer base as well. Recognizing that these people are not going to have a lot of time to read those kind of reports. They may well want to then dive into it, and I certainly know a few that do. But if you want to get that kind of message over, you've probably got 2 or 3 seconds at most to get the impact of what it is you're trying to tell them over. And it's actually an interesting exercise to do, to actually just flash something up for 2 seconds to someone that hasn't seen it before, take it down and say, well, okay, what was the overall message? What am I trying to tell you? And it really disciplines you to that. Okay, what else can I take out to make this clearer? How do I make it easier? Because you've probably got 2 seconds to grab their attention. You might then have an hour of them asking questions and digging into it more, but you've got a very short window to try and get that kind of attention and get that information over.
Yeah,
I feel like I need to do that exercise all the time.
Yeah, I think simplicity is really key when it comes to senior execs and whatnot. As analysts, we tend to overanalyze and to kind of really get into the weeds, and let's show 100 different ways of looking at things. But the reality is, they're trying to answer a usually a pretty simple business question, right? And so that requires a pretty simple number or dashboard or trend or view or whatever it is. Keep it simple, stupid, right? Is there for a reason.
Yeah, I think as analysts, we tend to explain way too much. We kind of want to show all of our kind of working. I remember, this isn't a high school maths exam. This is, this is business.
Right.
Yeah, these people don't care. And I mean, one of the biggest lessons I had from that was from a senior exec many years ago. Just turned around to me. I was being through his presentation. I was explaining everything. Stop trying to educate me. Just give me the answer. And that just stuck with me because it's he doesn't care that I've used these great regression techniques or I've done these funky things, and he just wants to know, like, should he make decision A or decision B?
Yeah. I remember one time I was asked, so how much revenue comes through the app? Simple question.
Yeah.
It should require a simple answer, you think. But I come from the analytical side and the e-commerce side. So for me, it was like, for what brands, based on book dates or stay dates, what app, is it the brand.com app or the core app and so forth. I had so many questions that my answer had like 5 different versions. And in the end, they found one answer. They picked one number out of all the presentation, which should have been the conclusion from the beginning, right?
Yeah, I get it. And it comes back to not being afraid to ask those kind of questions. It's it's in the blog that you mentioned earlier. It's asking those questions up front. Don't try and think. You don't need to solve every single permutation of the question you think they might be asking. Just ask them what it is they're actually after. And then you don't need to pull all the different sets of data together and everything else. It's but that's a relationship that takes time, and it takes effort from both sides to build it up.
Mm-hmm. And Salman, in your blog, one of the topics or the things we talked about is the evolution. You decide there's a new dashboard in place or there's a new view, and the fact that you can't shock people and just change them the dashboards. But you talked about doing and I think we've seen it, for example, when Google decides to launch a new phase. So then you get a banner at the top saying, "Oh, this is a new view. September 15th will be changing to this," type of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a kind of a balance between, you do want to evolve and change as needs do, or, you come up with different, maybe, we've added a data source to it that allows you to kind of, look at 2 things simultaneously, or whatever the case is. The world of analytics is obviously always evolving, as everybody knows. But at the same time, you do want to get people used to, or your users used to a certain way of doing things, and you don't want to keep confusing them. Every day they open the report and they see see it laid out completely differently. So it's a bit of a balance, and what we have kind of settled on is to have like your production version of reports, we call it, and then you also have a beta version, right? And you educate your users that beta means things could be different on any given day. The numbers are all the same, the data is still telling the same thing, but the beta version is just kind of our sandbox. Really to kind of keep doing things. And then it's really up to the user. Okay, if I know I need this number, I need it every morning, I need to send it out to my coder team at the property, I'm going to go to that trusted, stable report that I know. Mm-hmm. But if it's I want to see what the analytics team is up to, and then I'll go to the beta version, knowing that may or may not kind of stick around. And then of course invite as much feedback as possible, right? So have your users say, I like this way of visualizing it, I think you should stick to that, or this is a horrible way of doing things, why did you even do that, right? So kind of encourage that 2-way conversation, and always be open to receiving that.
Definitely. And Eduardo, from your side, the blog you wrote was focused on the customer lifetime value, which is an entire concept on its own. So imagine the education needed. I would say, first of all, you set the criteria, then you start measuring, and then how does this education work to educate? This is the customer lifetime value that we see in the evolution, right? When that come into place.
Yeah. We start with our customer to show the benefit on the customer lifetime value approach, because also especially for the peculiarity of our country with 95% of independent hotel, is really important to highlight how to analyze the results, because sometimes the GM for the small hotel or average hotel I'm talking on Italy, but on my previous working experience was more international. And here it's really important to understand exactly the revenue, but not only the economic revenue, but also the global result in terms of, for example, visit, click, conversion rate to your website, not after one specific activity on marketing, following one expensive or budgeting initiative, but also on a long period of time. So start to think more on the loyalty program and co-create on a long term the result, because sometimes people want to invest money on a short time to gain result, or after the feedback from the revenue management team say, okay, we are underperforming for 1 month in this period of time. So we have to, from my opinion, change the mindset and think about the customer lifetime value as the future for the global distribution, because changing the mindset and also the capability to analyze the result about the marketing activity, revenue activity, and etc.
And you talked about, co-create, which I imagine you're referring to everyone involved, right? You got a stake in this. Everyone in the company has a stake in this. So what's your point of view towards this?
We start from the top and from the bottom. So we start from the GM to highlight the result and how to read the reports. And on the bottom of the hotel in order to, so with all the people for the education on how to change the mindset, because sometimes it's better to acquire a new customer on loyalty and work on it. So it's something that take in consideration entire hotel, entire distribution. So from the GM to the old people on the staff, the F&B, and etc. And we start with the education to highlight the benefit and how to change the day-by-day activity in the hotel in order to apply a different approach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Education takes a big part of this all, and oftentimes it's the one we don't think about. As analysts, we're like, okay, this is the data, this is the report, move on. And I imagine a lot of the adoption of the dashboards is impacted by how much education is involved.
Yeah,
sure.
In our experience, we highlight after 3 or 4 months the first result of the customer lifetime value, because in reality is a long term, but we highlight the result. And after the 3 or 4 months, the employee understand exactly the result and how to change the mindset. It's something that is not possible to create in 1 week or in 1 month. It's something that we have to co-create with the hotel in 1 year or 6 months. So we organized some webinar and live session in the hotel, and also by sharing between the different hotel and different people in order to highlight the best case.
Definitely. And I see Anisha shared the blog post regarding customer lifetime value. Thanks, Anisha. You'll see within the blog, there's this awesome curve in there, which, from the analytical side, that's like all up my alley. But definitely, for me, when I see that blog is, how do I adapt that to me in my case? How do we make that happen for my hotel, essentially? Because, the more we understand the customer, the more we can target them to come back and so forth. Right.
I think what you touched on that about is analytics and data driving change and actually making real tangible things happen. And sometimes that also, I guess, means putting our own analytical pride that, we know the best way to present this, we know the best KPI, we know the best thing, because ultimately if it doesn't have that impact and doesn't have that effect, then it's probably not right. And we kind of have to go, okay, well, I thought this was a really nice chart. I thought this was going to help you do this, but actually, I can see people are going on to this other piece. People are self-serving. People are downloading into Excel, which for me is always a sign that we probably want to look at our data viz again, because it's obviously not giving them what they want. And sometimes, okay, look, we got it wrong. We didn't. For you guys, have to do this and change. Ultimately, it's not about the best analytics thing you can share on whatever analytics forums you're on, and have other people geek out and go, this is wow, it's the best Sankey chart I've ever seen. It's about making business change, and that's we have to fit around that.
Absolutely. And I think it's important whenever you do have big changes or new processes to put in place, how are you going to measure the effectiveness, right? And as analytics, that that's obviously very critical. As an example, several years ago, we thought about a new process to identify, for example, people that would be invited to our loyalty program upon check-in. And we thought we had a very fancy way of identifying, okay, these are likely candidates, and if your front desk agent only has time to talk to like 10% of people that are checking in about the loyalty program, this are the people you should target, etc. And we were, I guess we were fortunate enough or smart enough in hindsight to put in a control mechanism, right? So talk to these people because we've identified them, but also talk to these that are randomly kind of picked for you to, and then we'll study that. And we did over several months. We looked at your test versus control, and that's a critical piece to see if it's working. And in that case, it actually didn't work. The control was just as effective as a test. So that proves to you that hey, it didn't work, then you got to get back to the drawing board. Versus if you just think about this is cool analytical driven approach to identifying people, it might not be true, and that's the part that once it's out in the real world, you got to test it and you got to measure it. And that's part of the education, is that we tried it, the numbers showed it didn't work, so we got to try something else.
Definitely, for sure. So, and going along with, we're talking about all these dashboards. I think we started talking about how many dashboards we'll have currently. And, we'll have one with the online data, and then we'll have one with the PMS data, and then we have the billing data and the budget and so forth. So all these dashboards that we're inundated with. And I would imagine we have dashboards from all these sorts of places because we're working in silos, right? So the marketing team's doing their own thing. The e-commerce decided to use Google Analytics, which is not in the PMS. And then you got the PMS data and so forth, right? So maybe Eduardo, we can start with you. What are your thoughts? You've said a high percentage of the hotels in Italy are independent.
Yeah, it's the perfect country here for this concept. Thank you, Connie. Yeah, because we have the 33,000 hotel, 95% are independent, so which own PMS, channel manager, independent software. So here is really, really important to avoid the silos effect. So in this case, the dashboard, from my opinion, should be something related to the OTA extranet or the reporting. So all the employees here in Italy know very, very well the OTA dashboard, and sometimes they don't know the option that they have from the dashboard that is coming from the business analyst or internal data reporting. So from my opinion, first is to create a common layer that we can customize based on what we already know and say during this session, but also to understand how it's important to share the data between the different departments. Sharing data and the communication is really the key element, not the technical part, because the technical, we have the expert, we are the expert, but sharing the data between the different departments through the dashboard. So it's a key element, from my opinion, that should be taken in consideration. From my personal experience here in Italy, there are two ways. The first is to highlight the benefit internally between the different departments, for example, to analyze specific KPI for the F&B related to the pickup from the countries and etc., for example, but also externally. Because if we analyze the data, from example, from some region in Italy, they don't share the data between the different hotels. And it's strange because also with the tool that we have, it's really easy to check the rate, availability. So also share the data, and consideration on the destination is also a key element to avoid silos effect.
When you say, oftentimes the hotels use the OTA intranets, I would imagine it's also impacted by the fact that the OTAs all have a lot of training, their market managers on top of the hotels and so forth, right?
Yeah, they invest a lot on the communication. This is why, and it's quite strange based on the average. The average in this case are quite strange, but half of the incoming revenue is coming from direct channel, only 12% is coming from the website. So it's something, if you think about that is incredible. We have to invest on the direct channel, but they don't know sometimes how many languages they have the website. but they know perfectly the OTX trends. So they invest a lot on the communication and the availability option. This is why I really focus on that. So to share, and which element are important, not for my department, because I know very well, for example, from the department, but which data from my department could be something useful from the other one. This is the key,
right.
And how I can share it. This is the key, because if I know that, for example, if the Italian customer spend, I don't know, something for the F&B, I can inform the F&B department to invest in upselling at the beginning, before the stay, during the stay, or after. So to share this data is crucial in this case.
Definitely. And Salman, you had, when we were talking before, you had mentioned the one version of the truth, right? Because each department will see different data sets, maybe of the same thing. So who says this is it?
Yeah, and I think, we kind of touched upon this earlier. There really isn't going to be one version of the truth. As much of a, holy grail that we all chase. I think as analysts, we all know that data comes from different places. It's treated differently. There's, often a long journey between when it's generated and when it's looked on in a report. Any myriad of things can happen that, cause that number to be slightly different. So I think going back to the education, when we're putting these numbers together that come from different sources, or knowing that, somebody that's a user that's looking at this number also has access to this other financial dashboard that, that may or may not be exactly, aligned. I think it's important that education comes in, where it's like, hey, we're not chasing for this application, we're trying to give you a balanced dashboard or a balanced scorecard or whatever it is to give you a big picture view. We're not trying to chase every single dollar and cent and percentage and make sure that it's lined up. So it's that, it's important to kind of have that education in place always. And again, going back to what is the purpose of this tool or this report that you're trying to do. I think it is important, obviously, to break down silos and bring in numbers from different sources, because the value that we provide as analysts is be able to look at, one customer or one piece of production from many different lenses, right, and put it all together, and then make the best, or help our users make the best informed decisions.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I'd probably add on to that. I mean, as well as all of the different sources, we also have data from the same sources that means different things, and quite legitimately means different things, because the ones that we always see are sales or bookings, and I've lost track of the number of different ways people will define a booking.
Right.
For some people, it's room nights. Even some people, it's booking. Sometimes it's got cancellations in there. Sometimes it includes groups. Sometimes it includes meetings and events, and all these kind of different things. And they can all be right for that particular person that's kind of consuming them. So, even within that, it's more around, let's try and use the right language. And again, if we can keep people in platform, I think maybe we get a chance to talk a bit more about that. But if we keep people in that sort of platform, then the fact that I've put that on there with net bookings or bookings excluding cancellations or whatever else, it's really important to keep people in that, because otherwise that's going to go out into Excel and someone's going to change it just to bookings because it fits in a column nicely. And all the hard work you've done to standardize terminology and make it unambiguous goes out the window. So, but no, just as an organization, it's important that we try and get that same language that we're using. We overlap terms a lot, and that's where a lot of those confusions come. There's nothing worse and say a senior exec coming up to an SLT meeting and they're presenting their bookings number, and the guy sitting over the desk from them presenting a different bookings number, and then come down and have words with the analytics team, should we say. It's not our fault.
And especially because if we're talking about working in silos, right? Working in silos, but then looking at the same thing. So language and education makes a key, it's a key element, I would say. Yeah. For sure. And for credibility,
Yeah.
And I think involving different teams or different aspects or different I guess end users, again, in that dashboard development process, and keeping them as part of that. At our core, we have a group of let's say, handpicked, I guess, in the case of revenue management, we have 5 or 6 revenue managers we picked from the field to be our kind of sounding board, before we develop new tools or reports, just to kind of keep them in the loop. But there's nothing stopping you from drawing on different disciplines, right? So that's revenue, but you could have somebody from sales, somebody from finance, somebody from, and just have that be kind of an advisory board, if you will, of things. Because the last thing that you want, as Andrew mentioned, is in the meeting, people having an argument over this, that, or the other. You'd rather get ahead of that in the development process, right?
Definitely. And Salman, you had mentioned some type of gut check, which I think that
yeah, I think, as analysts, and I think everybody learns this over their careers, is that it's really important before a number is kind of, released into the wild, that important to have that gut check. Hey, does this number make sense? Does this chart make sense? And have, if it looks wonky or it looks strange, then okay, what's the reason for that? Imagine, freshly minted analysts coming in, looking at 2020 numbers, 30 years down the road, and being like, oh, that must be a mistake. Bookings dropped by like over 100% in 1 week. We're like, no, this is the whole thing that called COVID that happened, and it's all true. So having that gut check and having a reason for what it is, because if you're, you want to be asking the questions that that your end users are eventually going to be asking once they see the numbers.
I think it's easier said than done. Oftentimes, I'll be working on a dashboard, and I'm like really into it, making sure that, their numbers are correct, that they match, and so forth. But you're in a rush sometimes, and you got to go to the next thing. And so
yeah,
I question myself, did I step back and actually understand the data to make sure that it made sense, right?
Yeah.
And so in my head, what I'm trying to do now is make sure in the process that I let the dashboard aside, and then I come back to it with a different point of view, and see, like, if I was the user, would that make sense? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
I know that a lot of us work with analytics teams, or even with non-analytics teams and colleagues. There's nothing wrong with giving it to someone else to check. I mean, we do it for those sort of 2-3 second tests. You can do it. Just say, look, take a look at this. Is there something glaring? Because I've been staring at these numbers for like 3 days.
Yeah.
And I'm going data blind. Can you take a look at it and say, what you think?
Yeah, that fresh pair of eyes is critical, right? When you've been knee deep in something for weeks on end, just to have somebody come in and take a look and say, hey, you missed this, or this looks really, like convoluted, or why are you doing it? So things like that.
And we talk about, we're working on silos. Ideally, we want all the data coming together, this amazing, or the super system where all the systems are combined, one data source, one place. Is that realistic? Is it worth it to have that goal at some point? At some point we'll get there. The PMS will be communicating with Google Analytics and all that. What's your take, Salman?
I think, as a vision, it's really good to have that and to keep kind of having that in mind. But I think, from a practical aspect, organizations are made of many sub-organizations within it, right? And each of those have their own goals, and organizational inertia is a real thing. So it's tough to achieve that goal, Connie, like you said. But I think, as long as we're, the goal isn't necessarily one system, it's that the numbers complement each other, right? Or the trends kind of complement each other, and they together can give a picture to a senior exec that's trying to make a decision. I think, it's important to kind of keep coming back to the why, right? Or the why do we want one system? Well, it's because all the numbers would be there. Well, they can still be there. They just come from different sources, and that doesn't matter. But if that exec can see the OTA figures and the market mix and the comp set, benchmarking and all of that, if they're coming from different sources, it doesn't matter, because they're trying to make that decision based on many different lenses, right? So that would be my take on it.
And we talked about, bringing people together and the importance of bringing people together, because maybe you don't have the same system, but you decide, we're going to have this check-in meeting every month, and this is the key KPIs we're going to look at, type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
No, sorry. Now, for the hotel chain, for example, it could be also to use the extranet, because when you have, for example, a big hotel chain, when you turn on your computer, is something that is immediately visible in front of you. So also to share the data, share the information, is also to use the extranet about especially for the hotel chain, or, in my opinion, to use the company ambassador that can drive this information and explore news or any implementation to the community, to the hotel community.
I like the idea of company ambassador.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it per department you would think about it, or per branch, or?
No, for department it could be fine. Also, we use for the department. So, and also this allow you to have the monthly meeting with all the ambassadors that represent the entire hotel or distribution. So also be something that you can also change the people as ambassador, or to have only one that is really representative for the ambassador. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you're bringing analytics into new areas, I think that can be really important as well, to have that sort of first follower type kind of principle, where you can go in and you can sell something in, and selling in the value of changing the way people have been working. And some of these people have been working for a very long time in a particular way, and they don't need to hear it from me, they need to hear it from one of their own.
Yeah.
If it's a sales team and it's a salesperson that's saying, actually, well, I've just smashed my Q3 targets because I was able to use this data. Suddenly everyone's asking me for data. I could sit in meetings for hours and hours and hours, go, look, guys, please use the data, it's going to help you, it's going to help you. But when it comes from someone within the business, and they can really help you sell it in to that team, to that area, or wherever else. So it's really good to have those kind of allies, those ambassadors, whatever you want to call them, around the business.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how about standards? Where we might not have an ideal system coming together, but the standards that are used throughout the company could be the same.
Yeah, when it comes down to things like that, what is a booking? But even things as simple and particularly for those of us that work in kind of global environments, as which continent a country's in, and and again, it's not that one's right and one's wrong. And it may well be, for example, I've seen things where we've got sales territories, right? And I've had sales territories that are called the European sales territory, but that person that deals with Spain and Portugal might also deal with bits of South America. So you've got bits of South America appearing under the European territory.
Yeah,
that's fine. That makes sense as a sales territory, but it doesn't make any sense to use that if we're talking about where travelers are coming from, right? So again, it's accepting you can have different standards, but we just need to be clear on what they are.
Definitely. And it makes total sense, because it makes it easier to go from department to department, or that communication, right? Things are more aligned.
Yeah.
So for sure. I'll never forget, as we're adding hotels to our network, we have hotels that are in Miami and hotels that are in Miami Beach. And somehow it was okay to, I don't know who, to say that the Miami Beach hotels were in Miami. I'm like, no, it's a different city. Miami Beach is a different city. And I don't know how the hotels are okay on the website up here in Miami. I mean, if anyone's from Miami, I don't know if we have any, but it's not okay.
And talk about market mix. I'm sure there's a very different market mix for Miami Beach
exactly.
versus Miami.
So all that market mix gets skewed.
Yeah,
exactly. But that's a simple example, right? And how it triggers other things tied to that. So for sure.
Yeah. And that's where that local knowledge can really come in. And I mean, we can all laugh at that. I think most of us probably know Miami, Miami Beach. Would we be able to do that with secondary, tertiary cities in China or in other parts of the world that maybe we're not so familiar with? Probably not. And if I was putting stuff in, I might make those kind of assumptions. So again, it's using, when you're in a global company, using that global reach, tapping into that kind of knowledge and that kind of expertise, and maybe not putting Miami Beach and Miami in the same place.
Yeah, For sure.
And, you know, when it comes to reporting, I guess transparency, you know, really goes a long way. So we have an example where, you know, the global team is saying, you know, our as a region, North America, your, you know, RevPAR index was X, and we, you know, we tell a very different story, and then it's sort of like obviously very confusing to the SLTs. Like, how could we be better than our competition, but not better, you know, than in a different way? And it really comes down to what are those properties that are included in that definition of a region, right? So, and sometimes that can completely change the story. So it's important to be transparent and this is what this data is. This is the group of hotels that encompasses, or group of territories or countries, or whatever that case is.
And we have Ryan, who posted a comment on the chat. Thank you, Ryan, for participating. He says that regarding, you know, how do we deal with the silos? He's saying that within the reporting, they have a distribution list so that a lot of the, you know, new insights and knowledge is shared through that distribution list, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have email overboard, my inbox. You don't want to see my inbox, you know. So.
Again, it comes down to that relevancy, right? If you're sending something that's relevant to them, they're going to look at it every day. If you're sending them the, you know, the same big long report, we all get report blind, and you know, I'm sure we're all on distribution lists for things that we maybe don't read as much as we probably should do, because
Right.
we just see it every day. It comes in. It's another thing. I'll read that after lunch or after I've had this meeting, and then, oh well, the end of the day came. So yeah, it's finding that kind of sweet spot of how you keep it relevant.
Mm-hmm. Well, perfect. We're reaching the end of our session. I know we had more questions to go through. We had more content to go through, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you to the contributors for having joined us today. Thank you for attending. And essentially, let's continue the conversation. The next HEDNA conference is in Miami, October 11 and 12, where you'll be able to discuss with like-minded professionals things like this that we talked today. So if you haven't registered yet, hedna.org. Yes,
is that Miami or Miami Beach?
I think there's activities in both. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.